send me an email after the training this morning just to let me know who you are, because if you're just calling in, I don't have your name listed. Also, if you're calling in, you can use the *3 to raise your hand, or I believe you can use *6 to unmute yourself. Everyone else on the call this morning, you can unmute yourself if you have questions. We can also use the chat box. Also, I think that's all I needed to go over. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sheila this morning. Sheila, you have the floor.
All right, thank you. Welcome everyone. I'm going through the names of who all is called or who is on the webinar. Seeing some familiar names. And at any time, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand in the chat box, or and I do have a presentation, but I'm flexible on it. And if we need to jump onto something that you have questions about, I'm more than happy to speak on that topic. And I don't know why it went there. I've been having technical difficulties this morning. But anyway, this is just a preview of the agenda that I have. Like I said, it's very similar to those, for those, we'll take this off. It's very similar to those that have been to that have attended the training before. I've added some new things that aren't actually new, but something that's been new to us and experience from our previous experiences from different sites. But this is just a preview of what we're going to briefly discuss, the brownfields and the history, and I'll give you a brief introduction, and we'll go into what is a phase 1 environmental site assessment according to the ASTM standards. And something new that I'll talk about is the ASTM 224716, which is a site assessment process for forest land or rural property, which I'm sure that's a lot of what we deal with, and I'm sure a lot of other tribes as well. And then we'll go on to who can conduct a phase 1 and how the brownfields and a phase 1 come together as one, and then the components of how to do a phase 1, and at the end we'll have a question and answer. Or if you have questions, Darren, just post it in the chat box and I'll do the best I can to answer them. The thing is I wanted to talk about was what actually is a brownfields, and I know most of us are familiar with CERCLA. And the CERCLA, the purpose of it was to create a Superfund program, which we're all familiar with. But the purpose of the Superfund program, it was responding more to the public health and the environmental dangers that were posed by the contaminated properties. And this is just a few of the local Superfund properties that we have. Of course, we've got Tar Creek, the Tulsa Fuel, and Collinsville, and Eagle Pitcher, and Henrietta. And that's just to give you an idea of what Superfund is. But as Superfund came about, they found out most of the properties that were contaminated did not score high enough to be ranked in the national priorities list, or what they call the NPL, of Superfund sites. And a lot of these sites were located in cities and towns, smaller cities and towns. And with the Superfund sites, there were people that were losing jobs, and they were dominated in places, and they were seeing the dominance of all these properties, and they were in the communities, the smaller towns, and they potentially became brownfields properties. And then the mid-1990s, EPA provided some seed money to local governments, local entities, to launch a 2-year brownfields pilot projects. And with that, they developed the guidance tools to help tribes, states, and communities for cleanup and redevelop these brownfield sites. And this is what developed in the Small Business Liability Relief and Brownfield Revitalization Act, known as the Brownfields Law, which was codified, which EPA's policies and guidance. And then this Brownfields Law later expanded to EPA's assistance and providing more tools or new tools and resources to promote the sustainability of the brownfields cleanup and reuse. So since the inception of the EPA Brownfields Program, 1995, this completely changed the way the contaminated or potentially contaminated were perceived or how they were managed. And it just opened up a new door for the tribes and states, communities for economic development and how they come together and clean up and how to reuse these brownfields properties. And then that's what brought in the Brownfields Law. And the Brownfields Law, what it did was it gave a provision for liability only if a phase one was conducted on the property. So what the phase one does, it breaks the chain of liability and it gives a liability protection from the past contamination that was on the property that's going to be redeveloped. And then in 2018 was an update of the Brownfields Law, which they call the BUILD Act, which is acronym for Brownfields Utilization Investment Local and Development Act. And that was, like I said, updated in 2018. It reauthorized the Brownfields program, and there were certain amendments made to the Brownfields Law. And that also changed the way it affected the Brownfields grants on the ownership and liability provision. And it just changed some ways for the response programs too for states and tribes. I don't know why that is blank. Anyway, this is some of the changes to the brownfields. It gave the ability to spend your grant dollars in different ways or opened up more ways to spend the grant dollars, and allowed for nonprofits to be eligible for funds because before they could not apply for these funds. And it allowed for administrative cost up to 5%, and it increased the cleanup amount from 200,000 to 500,000. And it changed that you could use it in multi-purpose grants as well, where you could combine the assessment and cleanup in one grant. So what actually is a brownfields? This is the EPA definition that is real property, the expansion or development or reuse, which may be complicated by the presence or potential presence of hazardous substance, pollutant, or contaminant. So it's not actually something that is contaminated. It's something that may potentially, there might be potentially present. So people view it as it's already dirty, but it's not necessarily the case. And a brownfields is a property that is underutilized, idled, or abandoned property, and properties that may be or environmentally contaminated, and properties with environmental issues that may be limiting the use of the site. And of course, everyone has brownfields properties. I mean, everyone. And what you do with that is it can be, I mean, pretty open. Everyone has brownfields properties, but we just don't realize, or maybe we just need more help. All my pictures aren't showing up for some reason. But anyway, I'm supposed to have some pictures of different potential brownfield sites or what may be brownfield sites. But I've got a picture here of a former drive-in, and my other pictures aren't showing up. But it could be manufacturing facilities, old hospitals, gas stations. I know there have been some abandoned schools. Okay. For some reason, my pictures aren't showing up. Because I had pictures of underutilized property, abandoned properties. But anyway, underutilized properties. I had a picture of this, which was a property that that we did a phase one on for the Carnation. It was just a small piece of property. Can't remember the acreage, but what they did was it was just all grown up. They had developed it just recently very fast into COVID testing center. And then abandoned property. I just don't know why. Let me try something here. Try. Okay. I know it's not. It's just not wanting to show my pictures for some reason. But anyway, that kind of stinks. But my purpose in telling you this was that abandoned properties are not a bad thing because you can always use them for redevelopment, demolition, and on to new properties. And what I was going to show here was the Peoria tribe had what used to be a clubhouse, and they demolished the property, and they are now redeveloping it into a community center and a school. And I just had some pictures here, and then I also had some pictures up here from the Cheyenne Arapaho tribe. They had on their Concho school, they had a building on their property that showed that had a house on it, and they had demolished it. But the way they went about to demolish the property was they used it as a training site to be able to demolish the property. So I really hate it because I can't the pictures. Kind of takes away from it. But anyway, we'll move on. But their perception of contamination is what that keeps properties from being developed. The thought of having it be in there, not the actual presence. And once we get rid of this thought that there may be the perception of contamination, then we can move on to a more productive site. Now, the brownfields redevelopment process, this is what you have to go through. You have to identify the brownfields. It's best to have some kind of redevelopment goals in place so you'll know what you're working towards. And you want to assess and investigate. Your assess will come into the phase one. Your investigate will be your phase two. And in this, you'll do your environmental due diligence. And the phase two will be the sampling if necessary. And then it goes on to clean up if necessary. And then if you don't have any cleanup, it goes right on to the redevelopment plan for sustainability. And in identifying the brownfields, you want to know, are there environmental concerns that are a barrier to the redevelopment? Is the current owner, are they liable for ongoing environmental actions? Because that right there could be a barrier. Or is the property suitable for redevelopment? And that's where your economic and community environmental needs will come into place. And the phase one definition, an environmental site assessment, what it does, it's the historical uses of a property. Hold on, let me see what I can do here. It's part of a commercial real estate transaction. This isn't residential, it's commercial real estate transaction. And then the intent of the report is to assess if current or historical properties have impacted the soil or groundwater beneath the property that may pose a threat to the environment or human health. And if these issues are found, then it presents a potential liability to the lender or the owner. And this could also affect the value of the property. So a phase one ESA is completed prior to the closure of the transaction or prior to the acquisition of a property. And the phase one does meet the CERCLA innocent landowner defense. That's where that liability of previous contamination comes in, because the phase one will break the liability in the innocent landowner defense under AAI. And I'll go into further of what AAI is here in a few minutes as we get to it. And a phase one can be completed on all types of properties. You've got vacant land, agricultural, multifamily residential, meaning like apartment complexes, commercial or industrial. And all phase one reports are completed to comply with the ASTM E152713. And there are exceptions are made for properties comprised of the large undeveloped, which can be research using the ASTM E224716. And these standards that I'm talking about, the AST, we'll get into that here in a little bit also. But I want to clarify too what a phase one is. Sometimes we get a lot of phone calls. We'll get phone calls and say, we need an environmental assessment, we need an environmental review. Well, there's a difference between environmental assessment and environmental review. The environmental review is part of a document that's compliant with NEPA. And what that does, it reviews the projects and environmental impacts to determine whether it meets the federal, state, and local environmental standards. And it's required for all the HUD-assisted projects to ensure that the project is not negatively impact the environment. But that is an environmental review. So environmental review and environmental assessment are two different documents. So what you want to do into what is a phase one, it will identify the environmental risk before purchase or acquiring a property. It's required before commercial property purchase and most improvements and expansion, and evaluate the environmental issues at a site previously used for commercial property. And this is what a phase one is. I don't know how many of y'all have been familiar or actually done a phase one, but I always say, even if you don't do phase ones, I think a person that reads it should be familiar with what should be in it. And so you'll know the difference in whether all the information is in there or if it was just written real fast. At least know the components of what is in a phase one. But a phase one, it's a written document. It's got a standardized format. And then it consists of a site visit where you went to observe the current and past conditions and uses of the property and adjacent properties. And it will review the federal, state, tribal, and local regulatory records, such as the USTs, ASTs, of what was on that property, if there are any known or suspected release, if there were any storage, disposal, or production of hazardous waste that includes petroleum or institutional engineering controls. And the phase one will have a review of these historical records. That will include aerial photos, sandborne maps, building departments, health department, fire department, any kind of records that you find in your historical records. And it will also consist of interviews with current and past owners, or any occupants, neighbors, or anybody that's familiar with the property. And the phase one will have information about research on the property of the current and past site and surrounding property uses that could have adverse effects on the property as well. But this is all that's in a phase one. It's in a written format, review of all these records, and it's just information of what you find out of all this information that you look up. And then phase one, it's performed by an environmental professional, and the environmental professional is defined in the ASTM standards, and it tells you who can do it, and we'll talk about that in a little bit also. But it identify the potential environmental risks of the property and review current and historic operations that are known, and some common uses of concern that on the property are usually gas stations. You'll have some dry cleaners, auto repairs, manufacturing, anything that was used to manufacture or produce. Those can be common concerns of a property that you could do a phase one on and potentially have a brownfield site. And this is where we get to the standards, the ASTM 1527-13 and AAI. The AAI, the 13 is used as a guide to write and conduct a phase one. I call it my phase one Bible. I mean, I have it beside me every time I write it. I mean, I've been doing these for several years, and I still have to refer to the ASTM standards. And then they had the all appropriate inquiries, the AAI. That was developed by EPA, and it was their process of evaluating a property's environmental conditions. They're basically the very same thing. It's just the AAI is just using different language. It's using EPA language and then the ASTM, but they are basically the very same thing. And the final rule, it was written in 2005, and here's the title 40 CFR Part 312. They can both be used in doing a phase one, and how to look for things at a site recon, and how to write a phase one. And you say, well, what is the difference in these? Well, the AAI in 2013, PA adopted the ASTM 1527, excuse me, 1527-13 standards for phase one. So if you do a phase one, the ASTM standards are accepted by EPA. So either one, you could use either one. I personally prefer the ASTM standards. And you say, well, what is the difference in one or the other? The AAI was written for regulations. The ASTM standards was written initially for the commercial side of doing phase ones. And when they realized they were so alike, and they just borrowed language from one another, and they're both accepted. The AI just on the internet and look up brownfields all property inquiries, and they're downloadable. The ASTM standards you do have to pay for. And this is the new one that I've never talked about before in the training, is the E224716. It's phase ones for forest land or rural property. It's very similar to the phase one, and since the phase ones originated in 1986, the review of these properties, the large rural properties and forest land, they took a lot of time because it required certain steps. It wanted you to meet certain things for a site recon, for site visit requirements. And in July 2017, the E224716 became a compliant, meaning that it was accepted by EPA. And what the 224716, it just provides an alternative method for doing a phase one on forest land and rural properties, which a lot of the phase ones that we do here in our office, they are rural properties and a lot of forest land. So this has been really helpful in this. And what the 2016 standards, it updated the terminology so it's more consistent with the recent 1527-13. And it gives a much broader definition of rural. It wasn't specific on how you could use it and where you could use it. But like I said, EPA does recognize the 2247-16 just in 2017. And what it does, in the updated version, it defined the previous version defined a minimum property of 120 acres. The new version, it removed that minimum property size, and it just required the property to be rural or forest land. So that was the good thing, because you could use it. It didn't have to be 120 acres. You could just use it on any rural or forest land. And it does allow for alternative source for agency records. And it gives a specific time limit of 20 calendar days for receipt of materials by the consultant to review and complete in phase one. So it gives you a time limit, and assures that it will take at least 20 days to complete. For the phase one, the 1527, it doesn't give you a time limit, but this says it will take at least 20 days. So that gives you some room. And I will tell you, it takes at least 20 days, if not more, to do if you've got a big property, because we just finished one. That was one of the pictures I was going to show you. We just finished a property that Cherokee Nation purchased, and it was 4,376 acres. And I wish I could show you that video of what we had, because there was, that's where this is. I really hate I can't show you this. But it was 4,376 acres, and there was no way that we could have did a site visit on that site on foot, according to the 1527 standards. So what this does, I'm trying to look for it. Okay, here we go. This is the videos that the pictures I was going to show you side. It's not working. Okay, so the changes to the 2247, it allows for dependency on, it allows you to use the satellite or drone aerial photography and to inspect the property if necessary. And it will identify the structures and potential areas of concern. So we were able to take the drone in different areas of this 4,300 acres that we were looking at, and just look at areas to see if there was anything there. And it was mostly forest land. There wasn't any developments. It was mostly forest land. And then where there were structures where we could see, we went to that area and just walked the areas where we could see what was there specifically. So we were able to just look at the drone and then see if there were any areas of concern that we might need to go look at. And I really wish, but what I will do is we will make this presentation shareable. So I'll make sure I'll get with Karen so we can send this to you, because it was really helpful in being able, but we had to use the drone because there's no way we could have walked this. It would have taken a very long time. So in the historical records in the 2247, you have additional environmental records. You can use your aerial historical maps. And you also want to go into non-standard sources, such as mineral, oil and gas development, livestock dip and vat records. And another thing you might want to consider, which it says as a non-scope consideration, is your endangered species, or maybe his historical or cultural resources. That's something you might want to focus on more so than just a regular, compared to 2 or 3 acres. And another difference in the search distances is to be from the property boundaries, because it was real hard from the 4,300 acres that we were looking at. The search distance for the things that for the USTs, ASTs, whatever it was, it had to be from the property boundaries, and it was really, and I really wish I could, but instead of just from the site. So that's the difference in the E224716 is just more focused on, you can look at the aerial view, see areas you might want to look at closely, and then, focus in on that. Because there was no way, if you have, I know, even if you have I think we've got a site, I think we got a Kickapoo site the other day, and it's 300 and something acres. So, aerial views, and then focusing on the concerns that you might want to look at physically. These are pictures I would have shown you. Those are all pictures I would have shown you of the site. Okay, now we will get on to who can conduct a phase one. I'm going to hold on just a second. I was trying to see if I could fix this. But not having any luck. Like I said, I've had technical difficulties all morning on this. Okay, who can conduct a phase one? According to the ASTM standards and the 22, any ASTM standards, the ESA must be performed by an environmental professional or conducted under the supervision or responsible charge of the environmental professional. In the previous standards, before the 13 version, the environmental professional rule only applied to the person doing the phase one, but now you can do it under the supervision. And this is ASTM's definition of environmental professional. Just possess sufficient specific education, training, and experience to exercise professional judgment to develop opinions and conclusions regarding conditions indicative of releases or threatened releases on, at, or in, or to a property sufficient to meet the objectives and factors. And these numbers that I have down here in the bottom left-hand corner says Appendix 2.1. That's where it's found in the ASTM standards. And this is just more information about what an environmental professional is. You can be a professional engineer, or professional geologist license, or registration from a state, tribe, or U.S. territory, and have the equivalent of 3 years of full-time relevant experience, or a license or certified by the federal government, state, or tribe to perform environmental inquiries, or 3 years of full-time, and have 3 years of full-time relevant experience. And you can have a person with a bachelor's degree and equivalent of 5 years of full-time experience, or have 10 years of full-time relevant experience. So this is who can do phase one. So we want to know, when must the phase one be performed? It's anytime any party is seeking liability protection. You want to perform a phase one before acquiring the property. And you want to do a phase one when your previous phase one has expired, because they do have a shelf life. The shelf life of a phase one is 1 year. However, if more than 1 year has lapsed from the report date prior to closing or transferring, an entire new report must be completed. But you can do updates, but you have to do an update after 180 days. And then updates are the updates after 180 days that are required just to go back and do a site recon to make sure nothing's just changed. And you want to research your historical records. You want to see your database records, see if there has been anything new. and you want to do your interviews to see if there has been any new information from the last time that you spoke to them. And if these steps are followed after 180 days, the liability protection will still continue. But after you do this for 180 days, and after 1 year of that, a new phase one will have to be done, do an update every 180 days. So the shelf life of phase one is 1 year, and within that 1 year, you're doing updates every 180 days. I'm sure I just confused people. Okay, so when must the phase one be performed? This is what applies to tribes. Anytime you have property acquisition, feed a trust acquisition, when tribes acquiring land for future feed a trust applications, in which the Department of Interior must establish liability protection before accepting the title to the property. That's part of the feed a trust. And you must do a phase one when tribes are using EPA brownfield assessment grants, and when you're applying for EPA cleanup grants. And it's highly recommended that a phase one is done prior to the acquisition of property. But working with tribes, that does not always work. We don't live in a perfect world, but it's highly recommended to do a phase one before any purchase or acquiring, just so you'll know what's there. Okay, now we want to know why we want to do a phase one. Well, we wanted to determine, the phase one is a tool to determine whether a property is contaminated prior to the purchase or occupancy of property that will be developed. And you want to gather all this information to develop a professional decision on the condition of the property. And we want to identify any historical, current, or potential contamination and any sources that are there. And the purpose is the purchaser or future tenant, they have the option to complete a phase one to investigate any uses, current or historical, on that property. And of course, right here, there's supposed to be a picture of what you want to do first. You want to identify the site. And that's what I had here was a picture. You want to identify the site, and you want to be able to know where your boundaries are. If you can have your property, I had an aerial picture here, and I'm sure some of y'all have seen this before. It's just an aerial picture with the boundaries, and know where your boundaries are, and you'll identify. And you also, of course, you have to have your legal description, your site identification. And then we'll go on to the components of a phase one. Your site identification, what we just looked at, records review, your previous reports, historical reports. And you can order data reports, which that's what we do here at ITEC. Or if you don't order your data reports, it's a lot of research, lots and lots of research. They do, there is a fee, but I think in the long run, I know in the long run that it's still less money to order the reports than compared to the time that you will research all this. And then you want to do a site recon, which is just a site visit, and your interviews with people that are at the site. This is your record review of the past and present of the subject property, and the environmental professional, they will examine the records that will show the previous transfers of ownership or property. You're going to review any previous use, what was it used for in the years before, and some of these you may not be able to find in records, but sometimes you can go back and look at the aerial photographs and guesstimate, say, there was some development here in 1960, but in 2000 there was nothing there. So you know there was something there, but what it was used for, you may not be certain. But you can always say there was some type of development, commercial development, or whatever it may be that appeared in this aerial photo, but it was no longer there in maybe 1970. So that's how you would determine the previous use. The industrial activities they may raise a red flag. And here I was talking about the aerial photos that show the historical changes or developments in the property, on the property or surrounding area. Your site recon is more or less called your site visit. Your objective is to find information that indicates the likelihood of or identifying a recognized environmental condition in property. And your site visit consists of walking through the property, and you want to make sure you cover all the property and the adjoining properties, interior buildings, and structures. And that's where this step is different from the E224716 and doing rural lands and forest land, because just doing a phase one, they want you to do a walkthrough of the property, where if you're doing a forest land, you're allowed to use aerial views or drone views to see what areas that might be of concern. And you want to take pictures. Just when you think you have enough pictures, take more pictures. And be sure when you take these pictures, you want to take notes, because if you're like I am, if I don't take notes, I'm going to forget. And I download my pictures as soon as I can, so it's still fresh in my memory, and take notes with the pictures so you'll know where you took them, what they were, what direction. And like I said, when you thought you've got it all, take more. Site recon. There are certain things to search for during a site specifically outlined within the standards. And after the site assessment and site recon, if phase one is written, you want to write this phase one to inform readers of the recognized environmental conditions or concerns at the property or any other aspect about the subject property. So you want to write this report to let whoever is reading this to know of any recognized environmental condition. They should be able to read it and be able to say, this is a recognized environmental condition or any concern, and it should be enough to where they can read it, not and to specify what it is, what is a condition and what is not, what is a concern and what is not. So you want to be able to specify in that, so whoever is reading it will know for sure, okay, this is what they're saying, this is what is not there, this is what is there. And this is a recognized environmental condition. Some people just call it a REC. And a recognized environmental condition is the presence or likely presence of any hazardous substance or petroleum products in or on or at the property that may have a release to the environment or under conditions that are indicative of release to the environment, or under conditions that may pose a material threat of a future release in the environment, such as an underground storage tank. You may have some barrels there that may have something that released in the environment. That would be considered a recognized environmental condition. You have scope items. There are a range of contaminants within the scope of CERCLA and petroleum products. And if these products are suspected, they will be a recognized environmental condition. And this range of contaminants, they are listed in the ASTM standards. And you will also have non-scope items. And these are environmental conditions that properties may wish to access in connection with the property that are outside the scope of practice. And these may be present in quantities that may lead to contamination on the property or near the property, but not included in CERCLA. They do not present a potential circular liability, but they are beyond the scope of a phase one. The non-scope items are not required by the ASTM 152713. And these non-scope items, I don't know, whole list of non-scope items. I think it goes to that. I think I'll get to that here in a little bit. You have arranging contaminants that are considered scope items. You also have non-scope items that are not required. But if the person, like if I was doing it for a tribe, and if the tribe requested, I want lead-based paint and asbestos and mold, those are non-scope items. But if it's requested, I can assess for those to see if there might be a potential presence on the phase one. There were some changes to the standard in the 13 standards that included where there was more emphasis on the vapor intrusion and vapor encroachment. Where the vapor is now recognized for contamination and migration was about migration of vapors. So all phase one should include an assessment of real or potential occurrence of vapor migration and vapor release on or at the subject property. And there's a vapor encroachment screening, another ASTM standard, that's not required in the phase one 152713. However, it does recognize and it does mention a migration pathway for vapor that is recognized. So this is where it is. Here it is. Changes to the standards. In section 3256, it adds a new definition of migration. It says, for the purpose of this practice, migrate and migration refers to the movement of hazardous substances or petroleum products in any form, including, for example, solid and liquid at the surface or subsurface and vapor in the subsurface. And then in section 13157, it clarifies that indoor air quality is a non-scope consideration only if it is unrelated to releases of hazardous substances of petroleum products. So it's not required, the vapor intrusion, but the 1527 standard does say that there's a vapor migration pathway. That's what it's more or less saying. And these are just your record reviews, your standard environmental record sources, your historical documents, other environmental reports, and any documents important to the subject. And that could be anything. Maybe it's a newspaper article that you find that has some information about the past condition or what was there. And you want to obtain the records and review the records to identify the environmental conditions and environmental concerns. And my preference is records review is before the site recon. Okay, records review before the site recon is professional preference. If you want to review your site records before you go out to the site, that's your preference. My preference is to look at them before I go out there so I'll know what I am looking for. The other side of it, you may not want to look at it because you don't want a biased opinion of what you might see. So, but I myself personally, I like to look at my reviews, my records review, so I will know what I'm looking for, be familiar with the site. But that is your preference on how you want to do it. And this is the record information from government agencies. that you want to look at. This is just a whole list of what you're going to get. The NPL, surplus, landfills, any underground storage tanks. You'll get a leak and storage tank list. This is what you will get from you'll be looking for. And this is just these right here is the search boundary. They're looking for the property only. NPLs is 1 mile from the site. Landfills or solid waste disposal sites are 1/2 mile from the site. That's from your government agencies. Storage tank, tribal registered storage tank list is property and adjoining properties. This is just what you will get when you look up your government records. Your local list will be from your city or town, fire departments, your planning division, enforcement division. This is some of the contacts you will contact locally. This is your standard historical sources. This is just standard. Aerial photographs, fire insurance maps. You may or may not, depending on where it's located. Your property tax files, recorded land title records. That's just to show ownership of property. You want the ownership. I think the ASTM standard says they want the ownership to go back to 1940 or first development. Your USGS topo maps, local street directory. That's depending on where you're located, department records, depending on what area. Zoning, land records, land use records. Your zoning will be within, if you're in city limits. So if you're in a rural area, you won't have any zoning. And other historical sources, like I said, newspapers, maps, internet sites, anything that will give you information. And prior assessment. If you've had a previous phase one done on it, or if you've had an environmental review, an NEPA document, that will provide you some information as well. Other sources, the EPA, we use the the EnviroFacts database. We use the EnviroMapper, Terrain Navigator for mapping, Oklahoma Corporation Commission. You may find records from ODEQ, FEMA. There'll be your flood maps, the National Wetlands Inventory, and the Web Soil Survey is the types of soil that's on the property. That seems to be more updated than what you get from some records. Other sources, your historical information will be your owners, the title ownership, the title history in search of ownership. You can get those at the county clerk's research from county clerks, and interviews with past owners or adjacent properties. Interview with people that are nearby is very helpful. You can get a lot of information from that, and they will give you information that you probably can't find in any research document. So if you could ever talk to someone nearby, they will be a very resourceful reference. You want to find out the past uses or developments, and that's where you will get that information as people that live nearby or previous workers, previous employees, janitors. They have all kinds of information they can give you. Okay, here we are at the vapor intrusion, vapor encroachment. This is just the difference of vapor intrusion. It's the migration of chemical vapors from contaminated groundwater or soil that intrude or migrate into an overlying building into a building's interior space. Then you have encroachment. It's the migration of volatile chemical vapors onto a property or nearby property, not necessarily underneath or into a structure or the property. Okay. That's the difference between the two. And this is a picture. So we're looking at intrusion or encroachment, I'm sorry. This was a picture of migration of soil vapors going to the indoor air. And this is where I was showing the difference of an encroachment. But anyway, this is what the difference is in according to the phase one. Says it is not within the scope of a phase one to evaluate the potential for vapor to be present inside a building as a result of a release, which is the vapor intrusion. However, it is within the scope to identify the presence or likely presence of hazardous substance or petroleum products on the property due to a release based on an understanding of the various pathways and how contamination is likely to migrate on the property. So it's not within the phase one to say, yes, we have vapor intrusion. But if there is something there, you have to identify how contamination is likely to migrate on the property. So that's where the vapor intrusion comes into play into phase one. It doesn't say vapor intrusion is part of the scope. You have to identify how it might migrate onto the property. But honestly, I wouldn't focus too much, or if this confuses you some, I wouldn't worry about it too much because there haven't been very many sites that we've done that have actually had where we've actually had to do a transaction screen for vapor intrusion. So a very small handful. But if you ever get to that point where you have a site and you're doing a phase one and say, hey, I'm confused about this vapor intrusion, we can help you on that because it's very few. We've had very few that have where this has applied. But if you ever need help with that, we're willing to help you to say, hey, we need help. I'm confused about this because it does get confusing. And this is something that's the vapor encroachment screen. There is a ASTM standard, the 2610, and it is $65, but it's strongly recommended for the phase ones. And here it is. It says that as a vapor encroachment screen should be conducted or be supervised by environmental professional. There's a screening you can do to determine whether you have vapor intrusion or not. And this is just a site objective of your site recon of what you're doing. You want to obtain information to identify findings and recs for the phase one and review records review records prior to the site recon. That shouldn't all be there because it can help you locate areas of concern. That's my preference. And conduct research on prior assessments before the site visit. And these are things you might need for a site recon whenever you go out. You definitely want to take a camera, a notebook, your pen and pencil. We take a measuring wheel for if there might be any buildings that you want to take the square footage, or if you might have just a concrete foundation, you want to take the square footage of that. We just take a measuring wheel just to measure things, and a property boundary map. A property boundary map is very helpful because it helps you so you can look at the adjoining properties, see what's nearby, see what's on the adjoining properties, and just to know what direction you are and what location everything is, because you want to take the notes on that map. And this is some other helpful items. In the summertime, tick repellent spray, a must. Dog repellent spray, we haven't had to use it very much, or I've never had to use it. Flashlight, because sometimes we go into buildings that have no electricity. So a flashlight is very helpful. And a site recon, these are things that you just want to observe. You want to visually and physically observe structures, adjacent buildings, or any obstacles. If Are you in a wooded area? Is there a gas station? Are there commercial buildings, and what are they used for? Is it industrial or a manufacturing place? And you want to identify if there are any roads or paths with no apparent outlets. Because if you see a road or path, maybe if you can, go down it, see if there might be a solid waste dump or if somebody's brought something there. You just want to be able to visualize everything and write everything down and take pictures. But this is what you're going to be looking for. Just physically observe anything that's on the property. And these are just some other things you want to look for on the exterior. Um, any suspicious containers, stained or stressed vegetation. You want to take a picture of that. Solid waste dumps, any odors. If you smell of any odors, be sure you notate that, and that will also go in your phase one if there are any odors. Any pools of liquid, where's it coming from? Is there a color? Is it new? Is it something that's been there for a while? Drums. Are they empty? Are they old? Are they damaged? This is where your pictures will come in, PCBs. And you wanted your general site setting for the recon, current uses of the property. Are there places, if it's a building, is it occupied, unoccupied? What was their use, storage, disposal, generation? You want to know whether the past uses of the property can be found by conducting interviews. Again, talking to people that are nearby. You want to find out the current uses of the adjoining properties. What are the past uses of the surrounding areas? Some more things you want to identify as part of the site recon. Sources of water for the property. Utilities used. You want to know what utilities are used and who provides the utilities on the property. The sewage disposal system, how old is it? When was it installed? You want to notate the topographic conditions on the property and the surrounding. Which way does it slope? Which way is the water running? Where's the nearest surface water? And it helps determine migration paths if breaks are found. You want to describe any structures or any improvements on the property, new structures, or if there might be construction going on, a new building, or maybe just some kind of moving of dirt or whatever it might be. You want to notate that. The number of buildings, the number of stories, and you want to know what's it constructed with. Is it metal, concrete, the approximate age of the building, the square footage of the building, and anything of the building. You just want to write it down and be sure and take pictures of it. Interviews. This will help. You want to obtain information. You want to ask questions to find out anything about the uses, the condition, current historical information. And I keep saying historical information. That's what you're doing. You're gathering information of the current of historical uses, of what it was used before and if it's used now. What took place in interviews on who should be interviewed. Key site managers, like your supervisors, maintenance people, property manager, former employees, occupants, any reliable source that you know you can get information from. And the report shall identify the occupants and duration of occupancy. You want to state that because there's a section at the end of the phase one where you can write your interviews or comments for your interviews, who you interviewed, what their title was, if they were working there, if they were just someone you were just talking to, and how long they've lived there, how long were they familiar with it. So, and it says the EP should make at least one reasonable attempt to contact the key site manager. That shouldn't be that hard to get a hold of a key site manager if there is one, or someone who's familiar with the site. So, that shouldn't be very hard to ask. Interviews with past owners, operators, occupants who are likely to have material information. Just Find out information, talk to people. And you'd be surprised who would be willing to talk, or just neighbors, just someone that can give you information. Your state and local government interviews, anybody with your state and local agencies, fire department. You want to call your local fire department. A lot of times, if you're in rural areas, they're going to be a volunteer. So you may or may not get a response from them. But if you're not able to get a hold of a volunteer fire department, you can notate that in your interviews that Sheila Sevenstar-Horn contacted so-and-so volunteer fire department on this day, but there was no answer, not able to get information. That's all you have to do on that. State and local health agencies, anyone having jurisdiction over the hazardous waste disposal, or an entity responsible for issuing building permits or any kind of permits. Anybody that's associated with the property, if you can find someone to talk to. So we're getting to the end of the report. You want to describe all service performed, everything that you've gathered, you want to describe it in sufficient detail. And then the finding sections will which identifies known or suspect recognized environmental conditions and historical environmental conditions and de minimis conditions. De minimis conditions is a condition that's not, it's just it doesn't count. I mean, the minimis condition is there, like you may have, I think it's something that's less than, I want to say 25 gallons, but I'm not certain. I can't remember. It's like if you have cleaning products in a closet for like a janitorial, that would be a de minimis condition. In the report, you want to include the criminal professional's opinion of the impact on the property of the conditions identified in the findings section. You want to provide logic and reasoning in evaluating the information collected during the investigation. That's all going to be discussed in there. So you've got to discuss it and give logic and reasoning. And the opinion, the opinion shall specifically include the EPA's, the environmental professional's rationale, why, how you came to concluding that condition is or is not currently a recognized environmental condition. And the conditions identified by the environmental professional as a REC, currently they will be listed in the conclusion section of the report. Everything that you find is going to be everything you started from the site recon to doing research to going out there and all your historical, you're going to write everything in this report. You're going to give your logic and reasoning, and you're going to provide your opinion as to why or why not there is a recognized environmental condition. And that's all this is going to be listed in this report, and you will have a conclusion section of the report also. And then the evaluation, there is also in the ASTM 1527 Appendix X4, there is a recommended table of contents and report format. The report format, let's see it. No, it didn't show. That's supposed to be a picture right here that shows that. Let me see if I can pull mine out. Let's see. Here we go. The report format shows 1527. Let me see if I can find it real fast. But there's a format included in the ASTM standards, and getting the sections, it says to give a summary, but provides a summary of the phase 1 site assessment process. It may include findings, opinions, and conclusion. Then it has an introduction. And then they'll have a section, let's see, records review, where you put all the information of your records review. They'll have a site recon, includes site reconnaissance observations, including general site settings, interior and exterior observations, uses and conditions. And then it has a next section is interviews. Provide a summary of the interviews conducted. And then evaluation. This is where you document the findings and opinions and conclusions of the phase one. And if you have non-scope services, a place for recommendations and summarizes non-scope services, then you have an appendices. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different sections in the recommended table of contents and report format that you can use. Like I said, it's in the back section of the ASTM 152713. It's on page 42 if y'all have this. Let's see. And that's that. But it's ASTM 1527. All these standards that I'm referring to, you do have to purchase those. And that's just what we use here at ITEC. Go ahead and turn this off. Okay. That is just what we use here at ITEC. And what we also use a EDR parcel platform to, it's a software that we use. It's EDR parcel platform software that it's internet based. And what it is we get on the computer and it has all these sections of a phase one and we type it in. And once we get all that information in, when it's all done, it's complete and we format it. When it prints it, it's already formatted for us. I mean, we don't have to put in the titles or page numbers or anything like that. We just input the information, and when it's done, it formats it all for us, and it's very, very helpful. But I'm not promoting it. I'm just saying that's just what works for us. But and then we also purchase our record sources from EDR. And like I said, there is a fee, but it's well worth it for me, for us, to be able to purchase those instead of spending all this time to research all the information, because it's very time consuming. For this large parcel that we did just here just a month ago, the 4,300 acres, there were some things that I had to research on my own because there were some things because it couldn't be found. So I spent a lot of time. Okay, I see a question. Can we get a copy of a sample environmental assessment? Yes, you can. Just yes, I can send a copy of a sample. But anyway, that's all I have. I might have went through that a little bit fast, and I really hate it because I couldn't show y'all the pictures because I had a video of the large portion of land that we were looking at where we used a drone on that as well. So does anybody else have any questions or something I just went over too fast? If there's something you didn't understand, you can give me a call. Let me get back on here to our um, phone numbers. Let's see. Let me put our phone numbers back on here. Here's our phone numbers. If you need to contact us or email us, if you have any questions, like I said, if there's something that I just went over too fast or something you did not understand, please feel free to contact us. We'll do what we can to get you the best answer possible. And if any of the tribes, we here at ITEC are back in our offices full time. So we have started taking, or we have continuously. If you have any sites that might be a potential brownfields that you would like a phase one conducted on a property, let us know. We can come out and look at it. Actually, we've got a couple just here in the last few days. So if there's something, or maybe you're not sure if it's a brownfields, give us a call and we can, sit down and talk with you and come out and look at it. Or if you know one, say, hey, I think, we've got one, the tribe's fixing to purchase it, or we're going to redevelop. Anytime you want to redevelop on a property, you want to do this phase one because it's a potential brownfields. So if you have something or if you're aware of something, let us know and we can come out and do this phase one. All the phase ones are free of charge to any ITEC members. If you went out and contracted a consultant to do a phase one, it's going to range anywhere from $3,500 to $5,000. And I know that's pocket money from the grants. So if you have one, let us know, and we would be happy to come and help you and sit down with you, or maybe we need to discuss something. Okay, is this including? Can I share this? See, Margaret said she joined late. Is this training recorded? If so, can you share it with everyone? I'd like a copy of a site assessment also. A copy of a site assessment. If you will send your email to either me or Karen, whoever wants a copy of a phase one. Okay, and I see another question. Where could you provide us more information on formatting software and where is it purchased from? The information, or it's called parcel. Hold on. It's called parcel software. It's through EDR, and I can send you that information. What it is, each time you do a report, it costs a certain cost of report, and there's certain packages that you can purchase. There's like 3 levels packages, and we just always get the medium package. And I want to say the packages are like $500 that allows you to use the software, and it formats all your reports for you. And then in that you get the data reports also. Let's see. Get on here. It's called Parcel Platform. Just put in Parcel Platform when you start looking for it, and it's through EDR, Parcel, PARCEL platform. So, and that's where you can give them a call, and they can talk to you about the purchasing. So that's where all that comes from. And like I said, if you will send us either me or Karen your email of who would like to have a copy of a sample phase one, and then if you would like to have a copy of this presentation, I really had it because I couldn't show you all the pictures because the pictures did not do any justice of what I was talking about. So we'll see what we can do about making that available for you. So is there anyone else that has any more questions? So you can just do in the chat box, and then see, I'm getting these names down. Any more questions? No more? Okay, well, that's all I have. If no one has any more questions or maybe comment or have a question on whether if you have a phase one or if you have a brownfield site that you would like for us to look at or just not sure, just give us a holler, and we'll do what we can.
Thank you, Sheila. Well, if there's not any other questions right now, we'll go ahead and close it for the day. But if you have a question later, you can either send it to me and I can forward it to Sheila, or just email it to Sheila. We did record this today, so I can make that available probably in a couple of days if you'd like a copy of the recording or the link to the recording, or if you would like the PowerPoint presentation, just email Sheila or me, and we'll be happy to see if we can get that available to you guys. So with that, we'll end today's training, and we wanted to thank everyone for joining us today, and have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.